hands behind your back. Now, you deaf or just stupid?" The old man didn't move fast enough, so the officer grabbed his wrist and wrenched it backward. Marcus Coleman, 63 years old, felt the cold metal bite into his skin. He didn't fight. He didn't raise his voice. His hands were visible the whole time, palms open, everything by the book, the way his own father had taught him 50 years ago. "I haven't done anything, officer. I was waiting for my son." "Save it." Officer Brad Whitman tightened the cuffs another notch, watching the man wince. "We got a call about a suspicious individual loitering outside a federal building. Brown jacket, that's you. So you're gonna sit tight while I figure out what you're really doing here." Marcus stood on the wide concrete plaza outside the Federal Center, the morning sun catching the gray in his beard. He'd worn his good jacket. He'd shined his shoes. He counted quietly the things being done to him. Excessive force, 1. No Miranda, 2. Detention without cause, 3. He kept counting because counting kept him calm, and calm was the only weapon they'd never let him carry. "That jacket's seen better days," Whitman said, smirking at a younger officer beside him. "What are you doing at a place like this, huh? You lost?" A small crowd had started to gather. A young man in a hoodie lifted his phone and started filming, grinning, narrating under his breath like it was entertainment. A woman in business attire glanced over, gave the officer a small approving nod, and kept walking. And an older gentleman in a suit slowed, saw the handcuffs, saw the gray beard, and hurried past with his eyes down, not wanting any part of it. Whitman shoved Marcus toward the patrol car. The old man stumbled, caught himself on the hood. The metal was warm under his palms. Somewhere behind him, a phone camera kept rolling. He had no idea. Because the black man he just shoved against the hood of his cruiser was about to be greeted, on this very plaza, by a 4-star general of the United States Army. A general who was already stepping out of a black SUV 40 feet away, and who had seen everything. And in 18 minutes, Officer Brad Whitman's career would be over. He just didn't know it yet. But this story doesn't start here. Marcus Coleman was born in 1962, in a part of the city the maps didn't bother to label. His father, Eugene Coleman, worked 41 years as a custodian for the same school district, mopping floors in buildings his own son wasn't allowed to attend until the law finally changed. Eugene came home every night with aching hands and never once complained where Marcus could hear it. "You keep your hands where they can see them," Eugene used to say, "and you keep your dignity where they can't take it." Marcus carried that lesson his whole life. He drove a city bus for 34 years. He raised 3 children in a 2-bedroom apartment with a wife who worked nights cleaning offices downtown. And his oldest boy, James, the one who used to do his homework by the window because the overhead light flickered. James had grown into something Eugene never lived to see. On Marcus's dresser sat a framed photograph he looked at every single morning. A younger version of himself, standing beside a tall young man in an army dress uniform, the gold bars fresh on his shoulders. Behind them, a flag. James, 22 years old, the first Coleman ever to graduate West Point. Marcus had worn his bus driver's uniform to that ceremony because it was the cleanest thing he owned, and he'd cried the entire drive home. That morning, the day everything happened, Marcus had one simple intention. James was flying in to receive a commendation at the Federal Center, and he'd asked his father to meet him there. "Wait outside the main entrance, Pop. I'll come find you." That was all. A son inviting his father to watch him be honored. A man in his good jacket, standing on a plaza, waiting. Officer Brad Whitman had a different kind of history. 38 years old, 12 years on the force, 2-time recipient of the department's Community Service Award. His face had been on a recruitment billboard off the interstate for 3 years running. The captain called him a model officer. He coached a youth league on weekends and posted the photos. And underneath all of that, there was a pattern. 19 civilian complaints in 12 years. Every single one dismissed. Use of force, profiling, unlawful detention, reviewed and cleared by an internal affairs division that happened to be run by the man who'd been Whitman's training officer a decade earlier. The system that produced Brad Whitman had also spent 12 years teaching him that nothing he did would ever stick. He believed that completely. That belief was about to meet a 4-star general. "You hearing me, old-timer?" Whitman pressed Marcus harder against the cruiser. "I asked who you're here to see." "My son," Marcus said quietly. "General James Coleman. He's receiving a commendation inside that building in 20 minutes. Whitman laughed. He actually laughed, looking back at the younger officer. "Your son's a general." "Sure he is, and my dad's the president." He pulled out his phone, snapped a photo of Marcus in cuffs, and started typing. "Caught a real character today," he said aloud as he tapped. "People will love this." 16 minutes. Across the plaza, a tall man in a crisp Army service uniform stepped out of the black SUV. 4 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder. He'd come outside early, looking for the brown jacket his father always wore. He found it, pinned against the hood of a police car, hands cuffed behind his back. General James Coleman did not run. He did not shout. He stopped, took out his own phone, and pressed record. Then he started walking. Inside the building, a woman named Captain Renee Vasquez was already moving. She was the base liaison officer assigned to the general's visit, and she'd spent 3 years quietly documenting incidents involving this exact precinct, building a file nobody would read until the right case came along. When her phone buzzed with a text from the general's aide, "Situation outside, get the provost marshal," she didn't panic. She'd been waiting for a case the system couldn't bury. She picked up the desk phone. "I need the duty officer and a JAG representative at the north entrance, now." "Stop talking and get in the car," Whitman barked, opening the cruiser door. Marcus didn't get in. He looked past the officer, toward the man in uniform crossing the plaza, and something in his tired face changed. Not relief. Something quieter. "You might want to take these cuffs off," Marcus said softly. "For your own sake." "Excuse me?" Whitman leaned in close. "You threatening me? Your kind always, officer." The voice came from behind Whitman. Level, calm, absolute. 12 minutes. Whitman turned, already annoyed, ready to tell whoever it was to mind their own business. Then he saw the uniform. Then he saw the 4 stars. The younger officer beside him went rigid and brought his hand up in an involuntary salute before catching himself. "That man in your custody," the general said, "is Marcus Coleman. He's 63 years old. He has a heart condition. And he is my father." The color drained from Whitman's face. "Now," James Coleman continued, still recording, his voice never rising above conversational. "I want you to understand what's happening. I watched you shove a senior citizen against a vehicle. I watched you cuff a man who kept his hands visible the entire time. I have it on video. So does that young man over there." He nodded toward the hoodie. The kid had stopped grinning. He was filming something else now. Whitman's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Take the cuffs off my father." Whitman's hands were shaking as he fumbled with the key. The cuffs came off. Marcus rubbed his wrists, slow and deliberate, and said nothing. I want your name and your badge number, the general said. And I want you to know that in about 10 minutes, a JAG officer and your own provost marshal are going to be standing on this plaza. This happened on federal property, against a guest of the United States Army. You understand what that means? Sir, I didn't know. That's the entire problem. James said it quietly, not in anger, in something heavier than anger. You didn't need to know who he was. He was a man standing on a sidewalk. That should have been enough. Captain Vasquez arrived with 2 MPs and a JAG attorney named Lieutenant Colonel Pierce, who had a legal pad and a very calm expression. Whitman tried to explain. He talked about a suspicious persons call. Pierce asked to see the call log. There was no call. There had never been a call. There was only a man in a brown jacket and an officer with 19 complaints who'd learned that none of them mattered. 8 minutes. It moved fast after that, the way these things move once the protection comes off. Whitman was placed on administrative leave by end of day. The video the general recorded and the longer one the kid in the hoodie posted reached 4 million views in 72 hours. The department's public information officer issued 3 different statements, each one weaker than the last. The captain who'd called Whitman a model officer stopped returning calls from reporters. The 19 buried complaints became a federal civil rights inquiry. Captain Vasquez's 3-year file, the one nobody had wanted, was now Exhibit A. Internal Affairs, the division run by Whitman's old training officer, was placed under independent oversight within a month. The training officer took early retirement. He cleaned out his office on a Sunday. No ceremony, no farewell, just cardboard boxes and silence. Brad Whitman was indicted on federal charges of deprivation of rights under color of law. He took a plea. He served 31 months. He is permanently barred from law enforcement anywhere in the country. The recruitment billboard off the interstate was taken down quietly one Tuesday, and nobody put anything in its place for a long time. But none of that was the part Marcus remembered. The part he remembered came 20 minutes later, inside the Federal Center, when his son stood at a podium to receive his commendation and asked the room for a moment first. I was supposed to walk in here today and talk about service, General Coleman said. He looked out at the officers, the officials, the cameras. Instead, I want to talk about what just happened to my father on the sidewalk outside this building. Because I'm a 4-star general, and I was able to stop it. I had the stars, I had the JAG officer, I had the cameras. Most people don't. He let that sit. My father taught me to keep my hands where they could be seen. He learned it from his father, who learned it from his. 3 generations of Coleman men taught each other how to survive being looked at. And this morning, with all of that careful teaching, my father still ended up in handcuffs for the crime of waiting for his son. He gripped the edges of the podium. People are going to ask why I didn't just announce who I was the second I walked up, why I let it go even one more minute. I'll tell you why. Because the next man that officer stops won't have a son with 4 stars on his shoulder. He'll just be a man in a brown jacket. And if it takes a general to make a sidewalk safe for him, then the sidewalk was never safe at all. He paused. A badge is authority the public lends to an officer. It is not a license. When that authority is used to degrade the people it was meant to protect, the law has to answer for it. Every time. Not just when the cameras catch a general watching. The room was silent. Then Marcus Coleman, 63 years old, stood up in the 3rd row in his good jacket and his shined shoes, and his son saluted him. The first Coleman ever to wear those stars, saluting the bus driver who'd raised him. Marcus only nodded. His hands stayed at his sides, visible the way they had always been. But his dignity, that, no one had ever managed to take. The young man in the hoodie, whose video had reached 4 million people, used the attention to start a small page documenting encounters in his neighborhood. He's still running it. The businesswoman who nodded approvingly at the officer never said a word about that morning to anyone, but she thinks about it more than she'd admit. The older gentleman who hurried past with his eyes down wrote an anonymous letter to the department a week later. It wasn't much. It was something. Captain Vasquez was promoted. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce framed nothing and said little and moved on to the next case, because there is always a next case. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch as the sun went down. James beside him, still in uniform, the stars catching the last of the light. They didn't say much. They'd talked about all of it before, in one form or another, across a lot of years. "You okay, Pop?" James finally asked. Marcus looked out at the street he'd lived on most of his life. "I'm all right," he said. "Better than this morning." He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. Not fixed, but better. James nodded. He understood the difference. They both did. Until the day a man in a brown jacket can stand on a sidewalk and just be a man. Marcus said quietly, "Someone's got to be watching." The light went down over the rooftops, and the two of them sat there a while longer, in no hurry, the way you sit with someone when there's nothing left to prove and everything still left to do. If this story moved something in you, anger, recognition, or just the need to sit with it for a minute, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like Marcus Coleman's don't travel on their own. We carry them. And the carrying matters, because every person who watches becomes one more set of eyes on a sidewalk somewhere. So let me ask you something, and I mean it honestly. Have you ever stood close enough to see something wrong happen and felt the weight of whether to speak? What did you do? Tell me in the comments. Your answer might be the thing that gives someone else the courage they're looking for. And if you believe dignity shouldn't require a witness with 4 stars, stay with this channel. We tell the stories that name what happened and honor the people who refuse to look away.